Hey guys, how's it going out there? So today we're going to be talking about the new King of the Hill revival, which we just got our first official screenshot for, which I'm actually glad because for a while there was pretty much not a lot of information about the revival. Like we had a few details that, the cast were going to be older, Bobby's going to be in his 20s, but we really didn't have, and we still don't have a release date. Like we don't know when this is actually coming out. And I mean, also there was a few setbacks. The voice actor for Dale passed away during production, so there was a few production issues that they've had trying to get this off the ground. But this is like our first official look at what the show is going to look like. And I have to say, I like what I'm seeing so far. I mean, I like how they have implemented modern technology into the King of the Hill universe in a way that makes sense for a few reasons. Because when you look at Dale, he has the VR headset, has a vape, which that's kind of interesting. I wouldn't have taken Dale for someone who would go for the vape route, but besides that, like I could see Dale definitely being someone who would overindulge in the metaverse, VR, even like AI. I could definitely see him being someone that would be highly interested in that. And then you got Bill, who has, like a variation of DoorDash or Uber Eats, which makes sense for Bill. I could definitely see him being someone who was overindulgent in food delivery services and streaming services. And then you got Boomhauer, who has a tablet, which is fitting for him. But the one person that I really like, that they have pretty much nothing, is Hank. Hank is the only one in the whole group that is pretty much just how Hank was 15 years ago. He has a Alamo beer and just looks a little bit older. Because to me, that fits Hank's character. I couldn't see, even 15 years later from the original show, I couldn't see Hank being someone who would be very overly interested in adapting to having modern technology and using electrical devices. Because even back in the original show, Hank was always more hands-on, physical labor, doing things yourself, having the intuition to do things, having the knowledge to actually do things, working on things yourself. So Hank's always had that mindset, even when it came to the original show back then. And so I like that they've kept that it looks like Hank is still kind of not really fully on board with like using all the different types of technology that's out there now. It seems like Hank is just kind of, I think everyone knows people like that, people that are older in their 50s and 60s that are set in their ways from back, 30, 40 years ago of doing things the manual way, doing things by hand, doing things yourself, and, kind of keeping it to that. And so Hank is pretty much like that. He's just like one of those older neighbors you'd have that is just old fashioned, where he's like, I'm used to doing things by hand, doing things myself. I don't have any interest in being on a computer for 8 hours. I don't have any interest in looking at 1,000 different channels or subscription services. I don't have a need for that. I'm happy with how things were, 30, 40 years ago. So I like that Hank still has that trait that he had even in the original show. But as far as like what the reboot's going to be about, that's been kind of something we're still kind of speculating on for the most part, because we know that there's going to be a 15-year time skip, because they're time skipping for the equivalent of how long the show's been off the air, which is 15 years, which that's also fascinating. I didn't even realize that it's been that long since King of the Hill's been off air. And it's kind of interesting that King of the Hill has been off that long, because a show that kind of reminds me of King of the Hill, which makes sense because it was made by one of the creators of King of the Hill, is Bob's Burger. Bob's Burger kind of reminds me in a more of a modern Fox animation style of a King of the Hill show. Like it kind of has that type of, that kind of atmosphere to it that King of the Hill had. And so the fact that it's coming back after this long, I'm interested and I'm happy, because King of the Hill is, to this day, one of my favorite shows of all time. But with that said, I'm happy, but I don't want to say nihilistically optimistic, but I'm very optimistic and apprehensive with this reboot, because it's no secret. I mean, we've seen how old shows and movies that have been adapted with sequels and remakes and reboots, how they've turned out to be just fucking disasters. And that could easily happen to King of the Hill, which I hope it doesn't, because King of the Hill is, in my opinion, is one of the best animated shows of all time. It's definitely up there. And to have the follow up 15 years later be a complete disaster would just be very disappointing. So I hope it's more of the better adaptations of old media opposed to the more prominent, not so good adaptations. But I'm also curious about how they're going to deal with the politics of the show because something that was pretty prominent in the original show was politics, and not just like any specific type of politics. I mean, King of the Hill, I guess you could argue, has always been a more of a conservative route, especially with Hank. But I think the show had a lot more than that. I think that the show was very nuanced with how it dealt with politics, how it dealt with social commentary, how it dealt with social issues. I mean, when you really go back and look at the original King of the Hill, a lot of that show still stands up. I mean, I've gone back recently and watched a lot of the shows from back then, and I have yet to really find an episode that has aged bad or aged poorly or there was something said that doesn't look good now. Like, I mean, the show overall has stood the test of time, and I think that's why it's still so well received because it's just one of those timeless shows that's still good. And I don't know if a modern reboot, especially with how politically divisive, everything is, entertainment, everything. I don't know how that's going to go. I don't know if they're going to try to completely steer clear of politics and just kind of just deal with like the more slice of life personal issues and just kind of avoid that or avoid dealing with social issues like the original did. So that'll be interesting. Because I don't know. I feel like it would be very hard nowadays to try to kind of do what the original show did and pull it off. Because I just feel like in the 15 years since the show's been off the air, the political climate has just become so tribalistic and so toxic that I don't know if they try to do kind of like, how Hank was, more conservative in the original show. I don't know if that would go over well now, especially with how, both the, Democrats and Republicans, how just highly tribalized those two parties are. And is how just the whole, nature of any type of politics and shows or movies or games or pretty much anything, it just becomes a fucking degenerate war zone. So, in a way, I kind of hope they don't delve into politics just because that's just a fucking landmine that you're just pretty much not going to win nowadays. But besides that, what I'm also kind of curious about is the characters, obviously. Because, I mean, the one thing about King of the Hill is that it was a really character-driven show. And the characters' personalities and their interactions with each other is a good part of the original show. And like I was saying with this poster, it looks like they have kept in character how these characters would react or pretty much be as older 15-year-plus versions of themselves. And this might be me just being overly paranoid and going back to what I was saying about how remakes and reboots of old media have turned out not so good. There was a article I read recently where I can't remember who it was on the show, on the new show. They were talking about how we're going to see Hank Hill in a completely different light in this show opposed to the original. And on the one hand, that could be not a bad thing. I mean, it's been 15 years. Most people, even if you're older, you do change. Things happen, and you're not the same person 15 years ago. So there is that. But on the other hand, I don't know if that means they're going to change Hank very differently from his original character. And I hope not. I hope that they don't try to just make Hank just the generic, stodgy, old, back in my day, goddamn Gen Zoomers, alphas, type of guy. I hope they don't do that because Hank, while he kind of had that with Bobby back in the original show, Hank was open-minded to a degree, and he was also willing to kind of accept that he was wrong in certain instances, accept that his way of doing things wasn't the correct way. He was willing to concede, points to people he disagreed with. So, I mean, yeah, Hank, he could be very stubborn, very closed-minded, very, dead set in his ways, but he was also willing to admit when he was wrong and willing to kind of be acceptant to things that he wasn't really too keen on. And so I hope that they don't change Hank too much from that, because that was such a core part of Hank's character. And for me, and I think I'm probably one of the few people who think this, but I think Hank Hill is a very solid character. I mean, not even just a fantastic character. I mean, granted, you could say he's not the most overly complex character, but his character works for him. And especially when you compare him to animated dads, he's definitely up there as the best, which is not, I guess, saying a lot. I mean, because you look at Peter from Family Guy, you look at Stan from American Dad, you look at Homer from The Simpsons. There's more, there's more negative dads, animated dads, than there are good. I mean, you got like Bob from Bob's Burger. He's a pretty wholesome dad, but by and large, they're not the best. And Hank is definitely one of them. I mean, not just like compared to Peter or the others, but he's a good dad and a good character that is kind of a character I guess you don't really see anymore, really. And so I'm kind of curious about how they're going to kind of modernize Hank in a sense. And then some other characters I'm kind of curious about are Khan, because I read an article recently, I guess a while ago at this point, where they were talking about, I think it was the voice actor, they were talking about how Khan might not come back because of being like a racial stereotype or being racially offensive, which I don't know. I don't think I don't think that has any validity to it. I never saw, even looking back now, even when I looked at the recent, episodes, as of recently, I never saw Khan as being like a overt or even just any type of stereotype. I mean, he was just kind of that one uptight neighbor that just didn't like Hank and his friends, refer to them as the rednecks and hillbillies. Yeah, I never really saw Khan as being racially offensive or insensitive. I mean, the only thing I guess you could say that's like kind of a stereotype about Khan is that like him and his wife are like very strict about academics with their daughter. Which, I mean, I guess that kind of is in line of like Chinese, Japanese, households of being like very, disciplined with academics and schooling. But I mean, again, that's not something that's negative. I mean, that's a positive. I don't see that as even actually being something that should be looked down on. So I'm wondering if they're going to have Colin in the new show, because it's interesting. I think, and I might be wrong about this, but I think the last episode of the original show was a Colin episode. I think it was. So it'd be kind of weird for him just not to show up in this one. But speaking of some other characters that might not show up, I don't know if we're going to see Luann again, because as we all know, her voice actress passed away. I think it was actually during the show, the original shows, when her voice actress passed away. And then I believe that the voice actor for Lucky, I can't remember if he died or if something happened to him, but I know that there's a few voice actors and actresses that have passed away since the original show. So I don't know if we're going to see characters like Luann. And I mean, even Dale, because Dale, his voice actor, unfortunately passed last year. So I don't know. I'm not sure how that's going to go with Dale either, because with Dale, from what I understand, his voice actor had recorded a little bit for the show, but by the time he passed away, they were still like in production. So I don't know if they got a replacement or if they had enough audio from him recording to fill the whole season. I'm not sure about that. So it could be a possibility that we don't see Dale that much just because his voice actor passed during production. So I hope not, because Dale was and still is one of my favorite characters. And so I hope that we're able to see a lot of Dale, because especially Dale's the one character that I think would be the most fascinating to be in a modern setting, especially like in our culture. I mean, he would have a complete fucking field day. And I think personally what would be really cool, and I don't think they'll do this or can do this, I think it would be cool, and I could see Dale doing this, of having like a conspiracy podcast, kind of like in the vein of like an Alex Jones or something, where he's just like going off about all these different government conspiracies and world conspiracies. I could totally see Dale being someone who would have like his own podcast that he films in his basement, and just makes tons of episodes about aliens and government conspiracies and just all types of conspiratorial shit. So I'm kind of curious about how they're gonna implement Dale into the series. And I think Lucky. I was talking about Lucky. I think Lucky is someone also that might not come back either. So they're going to be missing a few characters, and I don't know if they're going to address that or if they're just going to just not be there. So that'll be interesting. And besides that, the last thing I'm kind of also curious about is Bobby. Like Bobby, because even I remember when I watched the original show, And even when I rewatched the original show, I was always curious about how Bobby would turn out. Because Bobby just seemed like such an interesting scenario. Because I could see Bobby could either have turned out being a complete abject fucking failure, or he could actually be like a success, or he could be in the middle. And I always wondered, like, I wonder what would happen or what would happen to Bobby, like once he got older. And now we're actually going to find out. And he's a cook, but he and I forgot now, but there's the way he cooks is very different from like how Hank does traditionally. So that'll be interesting. The fact that Bobby's a cook, I would not have gone that. Not I wouldn't have gone around, but I wouldn't have expected for Bobby to turn out to be a cook. I expected him to be more of like an entertainer, a stand-up, something in the realm of entertainment. So I was kind of surprised that they actually made him a cook. But it'll be interesting to see the kind of the clashing of generations with how Bobby and how he cooks food and his whole mindset when it comes to food making, as opposed to Hank, who's more traditional, more old fashioned. So that'll be interesting. But yeah, that's about it. Those are all my thoughts I have right now about this reboot. But let me know what you think about it down below. And until next time, I'll see you guys later and take it easy.